where you're in Germany, war is, in Europe is over, you're OSS, and you told me you get the word to go to Nuremberg, and not quite sure why. At that point, what was your position?
Well, I was part of the staff of the labor office. We had a branch office in Germany, and Karl Auerbach was with me. There were about 5 of us there, and we had been moving around, locating people and talking to people. Yeah, this is within the American zone,
Right.
as I recall.
Yep.
I don't recall the name of the town. But Karl Auerbach, for example, ended up on General Klein's staff in Berlin, one of the occupation lawyers. I mean, working with the American occupation force. And we were speculating as to what we would do. He had that as a possibility. Nuremberg had not been discussed among us. So when I was called, I didn't anticipate being assigned to Nuremberg, but I was quite happy at the idea.
Why? A lot of people were hoping to go home.
Well, I wasn't a young man. I had, when I was drafted, I was 34 years old. When the war was over, I was 35. No, I was drafted when I was 33. And the war was over, I was 35. And I felt that I'd started something, I wanted to finish it, and it seemed to me that this would be an interesting way of doing it.
Also, you're a lawyer, and legal history's about to be made.
Yes.
That enter into your equation.
Oh, well, the Nuremberg trial appealed to me a great deal from that point of view.
Yeah. Can you recreate in your mind's eye what you recall and what you felt in arriving in that shattered city of Nuremberg?
Well, I didn't. I arrived in Paris.
But eventually,
all this happened in July, I think, possibly June. No, June, I think. And then I reported to Paris, and we didn't get to Nuremberg until August. Now you want to know what I thought of Nuremberg? Yeah, I thought Nuremberg was pretty devastated. By this time, I'd seen a concentration camp at one of the big ones. Eastern Germany.
Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald.
I think it's Buchenwald, yeah. This is in Germany, not Poland.
Right.
I was with the First Army when we got to that. So I'd seen a lot of devastation. And I'd been stationed in Germany from, they sent me over in February of 1945. And I was in Bonn for a while, and we were being shelled from across the river, and and that was that whole area was pretty flat. So I got used to looking at destruction. Well, Nuremberg was really it was really flat. I got quarters in the Grand Hotel, which had a bomb going down right in the middle of it. You had to walk by planks from one room to another. Grand Hotel was not my notion of elegance.
Or grand.
It was a nice hotel.
Yeah.
And that's where we put VIPs.
Right. And what assignment did they give you, and who gave it to you at Nuremberg?
At Paris. In Paris, I was assigned to the document section. There were 2 sections. I don't know when they were organized in that form. You see, the main Nuremberg staff, whom I had not met, were on their way to London at that time, or possibly were in London at that time. working on the indictment and on the court and on the whole mechanics of the trial, and who would be the defendants and that sort of thing. And I had nothing to do with that. So I was in Paris, and we were getting ready for, well, I was there for a brief period of time. I remember I was there when the bomb dropped on Japan, because that was much discussed among us.
August 9th.
Shortly after that, I went to Frankfurt to go through the files of the OKW, the German High Command,
Yeah.
with a team of 3 German ladies, one of whom may have been Kawek, I'm not sure, but like her,
Yeah.
although possibly not as attractive. And we went through those documents, selecting documents that would be appropriate for the trial, showing the Germans keep everything very elaborately documented, and I was generally aware of what an aggressive war problem was and what I was looking for, and also of atrocities to the extent that they were recorded. So I was in Frankfurt until the end of August, at least 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And then I went to Nuremberg, where I worked on the Rosenberg files, which had been transferred from Paris, I think, to Nuremberg. And I worked there with Lena Fagan, who was another member of the staff. She had been in France working for the AFL-CIO, helping labor people escape from Germany to the United States, if they could get there. At any rate, she and I worked on that file. Now that is presumably the document section that was working on documents. We were collecting documents at that time and sorting documents. The defendants arrived in September and were placed in jail, and were then available for interrogation.
Right.
At that point, Tom Dodd arrived. Actually, he had arrived in Paris,
Yeah.
but he came to Nuremberg, and he was active in the interrogation side of matters, and he picked me to be his assistant at that point. We had known each other previously because he had a brief assignment on the La Follette Committee when he had been with the FBI. I think I told you that he had later moved up to the Justice Department and had prosecuted the Nazi saboteurs that were landed by
That's right, you told
submarine.
me that.
And so he had been one of the few, only American attorney who had prosecuted a Nazi. Well, he didn't speak German, by the way. I had, by the way, had a traveling fellowship from Harvard, which I spent at the University of Berlin, so I had
What
some.
year?
1931, I graduated, and I was in Berlin the summer of 1931, before Hitler. And I studied under Professor Goldschmidt, who later went to Princeton. He was a paleographer, an authority on Carolingian medieval manuscripts. I was working in the Middle Ages in those days.
Now, with Dodd, who has a role in the interrogation, did you yourself get involved in that actual process? Did you ever sit in or interrogate?
I accompanied him to the interrogation. He would ask a question, the interpreter would put it in German, the witness would answer it in German, the interpreter would put that in English, and Dodd would ask the next question, and I would take notes.
Which defendants were you in on?
He had a number of defendants. We interrogated Keitel, who, by the way, wanted to plead guilty.
And what happened?
Goering talked him out of it,
How did you know that?
because he discussed it with Dodd, not when I was with Dodd, by the way, but Dodd told me about that.
Why did he want to plead guilty?
Well, he actually pleaded guilty. If you read the transcript of the court,
Yeah.
he said he had disgraced the German army, which was a famous institution, and he had brought dishonor upon it.
He is played as such an ass kisser
Yeah.
that I have difficulty imagining any nobility of character. But what you're telling me now smacks of some nobility of character.
I know.
How did you feel about that?
I felt that it was to his credit that he wanted it, but I must say Goering had no difficulty persuading him not to do it.
Was the prosecution perhaps even reluctant to get guilty pleas because then they can't get the case on the record? Maybe they wanted, everybody pleads not guilty.
Oh, well, that was the famous split between Jackson and Donovan.
Oh, tell me about that.
Oh, Donovan's, you see, Colonel Story was the one who was in charge of the document section. And I don't know his background, but he did an excellent job of laying the thing out so the documents. See, this is before computers, and this is before Xerox. How we managed to do it as well as we did, I can't imagine, because we had an ocean of documents there. And he figured out a way of organizing it by topics and by one way or another, possibly a Dewey Decimal System for all I know, because I wasn't involved in that. Since when Dodd came, I was transferred from the document section to the interrogation section to work with Dodd. But Story had addressed himself to the document matter from the very start when I was in Paris. And he persuaded Jackson that we would have these people convicted by their own mouth and their own writing. And that for the point of view of history, it was terribly important to have this record laid out in that form. And Donovan arrived somewhat late. He came, I don't know, September at any rate, and discovered to his dismay that we were going to get up and read all these documents into the record and have the defendants agree that they had written these documents. And he said that we had the press here from all parts of the world. There wasn't any television at the time, I don't believe, but there were radio commentators, and there was a huge press corps. In fact, we put them up at the Faber Castle, and the Faber pencil people, they had a big castle that hadn't been damaged, turned over to the press. And they were sitting around waiting for stories to write. I mean, you know how it is. Every day they had to file something. And Donovan said, you just can't put on a trial and read documents of these people. They'll fall asleep. And I don't know if you have read any books on the trial yet, but if you read the Tusas book, T-U-S-A-S, USA, they're very critical of the American case as being soporific. I mean, went on and on. Well, Donovan said you have to have witnesses. And you have to have a certain amount of action. Now, he said, I think I can get Schoch to plead guilty if we make a deal with him. And I think he would then agree to testify against the others. We'll have a case that would, be of some interest. Now, he didn't suggest it would be like the Russian showcases, but I think he had that in mind, that a trial does have a certain dramatic well, they had a big argument about that, and Jackson said no. He agreed with Story that we would have to have this thing for the record in the future, and he wasn't going. Plea bargaining with a Nazi was something he couldn't tolerate.
How did you become aware of this controversy between these two? Was it general knowledge around the lunch table?
I don't recall. I was particularly interested. You see, when Donovan came, they took my double bed away that Harriet and I had at the Grand Hotel. We seem to have had the only double bed in the hotel. and he insisted on having it. And we found ourselves with 2 small hospital beds, which infuriated us. At any rate, we took some interest in the fact that we got our double bed back because he quit, or was fired, I'm not sure.
We'll have to get back to that.
So we took an interest in Donovan's relationship. I did not know Donovan, by the way. I mean, I never had any personal relationship with him.
But this substantive controversy was
I believe it's common knowledge.
Common knowledge. It was
And I
certain.
think I have read about it. I'm not sure.
Is that why Donovan left?
Yes. That's what I understand.
Yeah. All right, well then I'm just curious about the
But
logistics
specifically,
of
I believe it was the notion of plea bargaining,
Right.
which Jackson refused to.
So as long as we've touched on it, one of the things I'm very glad you're talking to me about is the opportunity to get the sense of daily life there. That's very much one of my objectives now. You go to the Grand Hotel and you're assigned a room. You have a wife with you. You get a double bed. Do you describe the room? What floor was it on? Was it comfortable? It had Biedermeier furniture?
Well, it was really a very nice hotel.
Yeah.
Except it had a bomb that fell down the middle of it, and therefore this created a certain amount of drafts. And there were planks that led from one part of the building to the other, which is an unusual feature of a Grand Hotel. We had to reach our room by a plank. But once you were in the room, it was a very well-maintained room. They had service, they had a dining room, they had a barber shop, they had a beauty parlor where my wife could get a permanent for $1. 10 marks. It was then marked as 10 cents.
That was the rate was
Exchange.
10 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
I have to remember that.
And
now,
also, I think we had occupation marks.
script.
Script.
When did you get bounced from the room or just from the double bed? Did you lose?
Oh no, we got the double bed.
Oh,
Disappeared.
He confiscated the bed.
Now there's the man in charge of the hotel is Captain Bonites, who I just saw the other day at our reception. He lives here, and his daughter has a florist.
I got to look him up.
Oh, he can tell you all about
How do you
this.
spell his name?
Well, it's in that list that Sprecher will give you of who was the
Right,
president,
right.
and he'll give you the address too. Vonetes, something like that. A Greek. He was the captain, and he was very good. We weren't supposed to be husband and wife, but he understood that we were, and he put us in a room together.
So one day you get there and the bed is gone, or you were notified?
No, the bed was gone and 2 beds were there. He didn't discuss
And then when
that.
Donovan left, your bed came back?
Yes.
Okay, that's enough on that. I'm
And
curious.
incidentally, our daughter was conceived there, and that's why we had to leave Nuremberg in
Yeah,
June.
yeah. So we've touched on the character of Jackson. I'm interested. What struck you forcibly about Justice Jackson?
Well, I never met the man to talk to. I did talk to his assistant. Jim Rowe was a classmate of mine.
All right, let's talk about Rowe a bit then.
He was.
Because he's an intriguing figure.
Oh yeah. He was he was Jackson's clerk at the trial, and he had been at law school with me. I knew him pretty well, and a lot of my stories come from him. He was Biddle's law clerk, I should say, not Jackson's.
That's what's fortunate, because I'm not going to get to Jim Rowe, that's for sure.
No, he's dead.
Yeah.
But my favorite story of Nuremberg, I think you'll find it in one of these books, is that the 4 judges met and voted to condemn, voted the sentences, that found them all guilty, and 3 were acquitted: Schacht, Fritsche, and von Papen. And he agreed to that. And then they also approved Burkitt's opinion, which he had written, which is brilliant. A great lawyer. He was the deputy to Lawrence. And then the French judge, according to, did I tell you this story? According to Jim Rowe, the French judge said that the translation that had been made by the staff into French from Burkitt's opinion was execrable French, and he had to rewrite it into decent French. Took him a week. And I am informed, I haven't looked at it too, bears very little relationship what he wrote to what Burkitt wrote, but still. In that week, word came from Moscow, apparently, to the Russian judge, commenting on the fact that it was their understanding that no defendant could be found innocent, not guilty. So the judge said that he regretted that he had to change his vote and he had to dissent. And the Lord Justice Warren said, you can't do that. First of all, you voted. Second of all, there's no provision in here for dissent. And the French judge chimed in and said, you can't do it either. And they said, he said, he's going to. And then Biddle spoke up and said that he had just written a book on Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., the great dissenter, and he thought dissenting was a perfectly appropriate thing to do. And he had no problem with the Russian judge dissenting.
This is Nikitchenko.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if this story is true or not, but this is what Rowe told me, and that pulled the rug out from under the French and the British judges, and they then agreed to have him dissent, which he did.
Yeah.
And later that afternoon, he came to see Mr. Biddle and thanked him for the support he had given him at the meeting. And then he said that he had, in Russia, not had any experience writing dissents.
That's a great one.
And he would be grateful for Mr. Biddle for any assistance.
It's so ironic. You can just hear the Russian hadn't had much experience disagreeing. That's marvelous. Did you ever sense any...
Well, whether that happened or not, I don't know. That's hearsay from Jim Rowe. But no, a wonderful story, I thought.
I think it's great. What did Rowe look like?
He was very... I thought he was a handsome gentleman. He wasn't a particularly a brilliant student, but Frankfurter was very attached to him and got him this job, you remember, after graduation as a secretary to Mr. Holmes after his retirement.
So Jim Rowe has been a witness to a great historic figure.
Oh yes, he was very close. I mean, they were very... he was an attractive and intelligent fellow, and apparently he got along splendidly with Holmes. But he didn't have to write opinions for him. That wasn't his gift.
Not a legal scholar.
About Jim Rowe, he was from Montana, I understand.
Correct.
Did he have that character of Westerner, the direct, bluff, open character?
That's how I describe it, yes.
Yeah. Just like to know, did you have any dealings or did you observe things that would shed light on the relationships with the Russians, with their prosecutors, with their judges?
Well, yeah, I don't know how accurate they are is the problem. For example, it was my impression that the deputy judge was what do they call their intelligence?
And then it was NKVD.
KVD.
Volchkov.
He doesn't seem to be, and he was also, we thought the judge was rather a sympathetic and interesting man, and his deputy was a very dangerous man. The judge used to dance with the American secretaries and be quite...
Nikitchenko?
Yes.
Where?
Oh, well, we had parties around the courtroom, and he sort of joined in the general thing, but the deputy would glower away from the corner, and we had the feeling that he and the judge were not on such good terms. Then there was that wonderful story, but it may not be true, which I think I got this from Rowe too, but I'm not sure who I got it from. General Gill was the chief administrative officer for Jackson.
Yeah.
And I don't know where he's from. Somebody said from Texas. I thought he was from Maryland. Anyway, he's a bridge player, I was told. And that he had gone through the IBM cards of the Army and gotten all the people that wrote bridge columns that had been drafted, because we had a collection of super duper bridge players there. Bridge game going all the time. Harriet was a marvelous bridge player. And so she got me in there. We were playing bridge all the time. That's one way we stayed alive in playing bridge.
Where would you play?
Well, courtroom had a thing like this.
In a lounge?
You know.
Yeah. Would this be at lunch hours or after work?
Oh, all the time. When we weren't otherwise occupied, we were playing bridge.
Yeah.
And these guys, you know, the hand would be put out, and they'd tell you what you had in your hand after one card had been played. They were really very good.
You touched on something.
Anyway, the point is that General Gill was the administrative officer. At any rate, one day, General Gill was approached by the Russian administrative officer and said he wished to ship a body off to Moscow. And Gill said, "What body is that?" And the Russian said, "We have this understanding that we can come and go without all these questions being raised." Well, said, I still have to know what kind of a body is going out. Is it a Russian body? What body is it? Well, it turned out to be this officer that was negotiating with. So Gill said, "What? Oh, goodness, that's terrible. What happened to him?" Details. Said well, he was shot. Shot? How did that happen? Why do we have to? All I want to do is ship a body out. Accident. He was cleaning his gun that went off. So that's the. Anyway, that was the end of the subsequent proceedings.
That's interesting. That's fascinating. Let's go back again to the interrogation. You told me you sat in on Keitel.
I sat in on Stryker.
All right, tell me, you go in for the first time. Here's this awful person you've heard about, the great Jew Bader. What do you remember about Stryker?
I remember we had great difficulty getting interpreters. There are very few people.
Yeah.
Interpreting, by the way, is not an easy thing to do.
No, it's an art.
And we didn't have any artists. We'd recruited a number of young German kids that had fled from Germany and grown up in time to be drafted.
German Jewish refugees who went to America and that
Right.
sort of thing.
And who spoke German fluently, but fluently like 8-year-olds who don't really have a very large vocabulary and who don't really have very much understanding of what they're talking about. So that it filtered the ideas of these people we were doing it not very successfully.
Interesting insight.
And they also had accent problems. So this man said, "Am I before a church?" is how he translated
Yes,
Stryker. I remember this because it all struck me as rather comical. But, it took about 5 minutes before we got that all straightened out because before a church said, "God, what do you mean?" And that went on and on.
I would have a sense, I think, if I met Julius Stryker, that this guy was a big deal. I would think I would have found it hard to believe that this was an important figure because he sounds like such a worm.
He was a worm. They hated him in the court. I mean, you see, we had the notion that this was a conspiracy.
Right.
That the American conspiracy kind of is our familiar formula for dealing with the mafia or criminal groups.
Yeah.
It's not I believe, a doctrine familiar to Europeans under civil law.
Right.
And therefore, Jacques couldn't understand why he and
they weren't on the
Stryker.
scene?
He never met Stryker. He didn't want to be Stryker. He loathed Stryker. He couldn't understand why they were together and why he was responsible for what Stryker did and Stryker was responsible for what he did. What sort of nonsense is this? That was one of the problems we had with the trial.
Where were the interrogations taking place? Give me a feel for that ambiance.
It's in the courthouse. You go to a room, and there was a desk, and not very many people in it. There was the interpreter and the defendant. Now, for example, I was assigned to accompany Keitel and Jodl, to the Russians when they were interrogating him.
Yeah.
Because they asked to interrogate. You know, we had all the prisoners.
Right.
The Russians only had 2.
Yeah.
One of the reasons the Russians agreed to the trial was they couldn't get in on the trial.
They didn't have the
They
bodies.
didn't have any bodies.
Yeah.
And Jackson kept saying, well, you know, you don't play it our way, you aren't going to have a trial. They couldn't understand why people could be found innocent. I mean, in fact, they didn't stand. Their idea of a trial was to identify the prisoner and be sure you had the right person. They hadn't made a mistake that way. And if he had anything to say in his defense by way of mitigation, well, you could hear what he had to say before you shot him.
Right.
But the idea of proving he was guilty, I mean, so they all arrived, these 2 people arrived, the Rader and Pritchard arrived,
Right.
each with a confession saying, I am guilty of war crime number 1, war crime number 2, and war crime number 3. And he said, well, you can't confess to war crime number 1, you have to say what you did.
Yeah.
So they found all that very detailed, I mean, contrary to their notions.
But you were taken, at points your responsibility was to accompany, escort. You said
Well,
you-
they weren't sure that they were going to come back.
That's why they wanted an American.
And Keitel kept calling me Major. And I thought that was very nice of him. He didn't really feel a lieutenant should be taking him in. But they were very happy to have an American officer with them at the...
When you accompany these people, like Keitel, does he maintain military bearing?
Oh, yes, they were very erect. He was a stuffed shirt, but he did conduct himself. And, you know, he wore clean uniforms and a press clothes and that sort of thing. Goering is quite different, but I mean, he was like, you know, he'd flirt with the secretaries and that sort of stuff. But
Where would he have an opportunity to do that?
in courtroom, he was constantly, say he sat on the aisle. I mean, they were lined up that way with Goering as number 1.
Yeah.
He sat on the aisle, and he could, the girls passed, he could,
Would you observe this?
oh yeah, he was constantly, he was horsing around.
Could you understand any of the bon mots that he might be exchanging?
I couldn't hear them, no.
He sounds like a thoroughly fascinating son of a bitch.
Yeah, he was. Incidentally, Kempner was very close with his widow, his wife rather, Emma. If you do meet Kempner, if he's still, I gather he's still in possession of his marbles, I'm sure you'll find him one of the most, I haven't seen anybody else interview him in English. I mean,
Yeah,
in the
that
book.
would be a good one. Frau Gehring is somewhere near Nuremberg when all this is going on?
Yes. I don't know where, but he would know because he was in touch with her.
Yeah. What lingers in your memory about Jodl?
I was at the interrogation of Jodl, my favorite. The Russians regarded, well, they didn't like these guys anyway, but they were interrogating him about the measures taken against partisans.
Yes.
If a German soldier was killed, he was killed so many parties.
Right.
And they wanted to get it clear that he was responsible for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And he kept insisting that he was in charge of strategic matters and he didn't get involved in details like how many partisans he killed and so on. So they said, look, now if you had been the commander of that particular thing, what would you have done and so forth? And he said, if my grandmother had wheels, she would have been a bicycle. The Russians said, what? I mean, that led to...
You don't expect that out of a German
I love that.
General
I've been
staff.
using it ever since myself.
Beyond escorting.
Von Papen and Dodd spent a lot of time together
Yeah.
because Dodd was a very active Catholic.
Yeah.
And apparently Von Papen was a very active
Yeah.
Catholic. And they got into all sorts of discussions. Of course, Von Papen maintained that You know, the only reason he was there is because he was mixed up in things in World War I. We had the wrong war. Remember, he had been directly involved in the Black Tom massacre.
That's right, that's right.
And he was convinced that we had him on trial because of that.
That's fascinating.
But, I mean, after all, what had he done? He had really been prime minister and got Hitler in power. That's a pretty legitimate activity, certainly not a war crime. And indeed, he was acquitted.
Yeah.
But he and Dodd, I think Dodd was sort of thinking of putting him up as he didn't like some of the defendants either. But I didn't get too much involved. But they did have many conversations, many of which I was not at. But they were quite close together. Remember, Father Walsh was there too.
Father Walsh.
Well, it's called the Father Walsh School of Diplomacy at Georgetown University.
Yeah. I've heard of that, but I didn't.
They trained the Foreign Service.
Right.
Well, that Father Walsh was at Nuremberg, at the Grand Hotel.
Yeah.
And he and Dodd were having dinner together all the time. They were very thick.
Yeah.
Now, he was sort of representing the Pope. The Vatican had a grievance against the Nazis because the priests and the nuns had been put in concentration camps, and the anti-Catholic activity was very strong. And indeed, the Vatican put an affidavit on the record about all this. And that led to the famous confrontation with Frank.
Oh, that's what I'd like
When
to
Frank
know.
said that shocking thing for the Vatican to enter into this illegal trial, and as they withdrew, he would withdraw from the Catholic Church. You know that famous interview between Goering and Hess? They gave me a earphone on that. Somebody else had
Oh,
one.
you're a personal witness to that.
Yeah.
Where does that take place? In the courtroom?
I don't know. In another room. I was up on
Yeah,
another room listening to it on the earphone.
yeah.
This is the first time the simultaneous translation thing was ever used.
Yeah.
I thought they pulled it off brilliantly. I thought it went off very well. But the problem was there were very few people we could find who could speak Russian and handle that.
Yeah.
And so we ended up mostly with German, the Russian Jewish emigres who had terrific accents, and they were mostly women. And therefore, when Rudenko, the prosecutor, with his deep Russian bass voice, was thundering away, he would have his pocket. I thought it was Arthur.
Arthur Kimball. Yeah, and his job is...
He decorated, he was in charge of getting the courtroom in order.
Yeah. When you got there...
he wasn't the architect or the engineer.
No, I understand. To repair it, restore it.
He was in
To
charge of seeing that it
useful
was done,
condition.
and that he got the requisitions through to accomplish it.
Was it in pretty bad shape?
Oh, yeah.
Do you
For
recall?
example, they had to tear a wall down and make it a bigger room and
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
Did it take any direct hits that you know about?
Yes, it took a direct hit.
It did.
But it wasn't destroyed.
And I want to get on my tape here, if you don't mind repeating yourself a little bit about what you said, that he had orders directly from Truman?
Yes, well, he first made a survey with the engineers and architects as to what was required, but all that had to come from the States. The carpets, the drapes, I don't know what he did, but he did a wonderful job. It was a very attractive courtroom.
Yeah, it was.
You
Majestic,
see pictures of it.
august.
Right.
Yeah.
And the wall had to be torn down and extended, and the podium had to be created, and all that had to be imported from the States. There was nothing available in Germany that we could find.
How short a period was this done?
Well, we got there in August. I don't know when he got there. So he flew over to the States with the engineers and architects in order to order this material, which he did. And he had this letter from Jackson, which he brought to Truman, asking for them to send assistance, which apparently they did when he was in the States.
Yeah.
But then he got this letter, which led to his discomfort, ensuring a rapid return to Nuremberg. But that was from the president.
Did you have direct dealings with Kempner?
Oh, yes, he and I were, well, Harriet worked directly for him,
Right.
and as you can see, he thought they got along very well together. She thought he was delightful, and he thought she was delightful. And
At this period, how old a man is Kempner?
I have no idea, but he was certainly not a young man, but he wasn't an old man. He was kind of, middle aged.
He had been
30s, 40s. I think.
in the pre-war period in Berlin,
Yes.
and what was his?
Well, sort of like Morgenthau is in New York. What's his job?
He's a district attorney.
Yeah, district attorney.
Yeah.
But whether he was the district
Yeah.
attorney or on the staff, I'm not sure.
But does he survive the war in Germany? He stays there. I mean, he's not one of these refugees. that
Oh, yeah,
comes-
he was a refugee.
Oh, he did. He flees Germany.
Yes.
Is he Jewish?
I don't think so.
But he flees Germany.
Well, he'd been prosecuting these characters.
Yeah, so he has to get the hell out.
Yeah.
And then he comes back.
Well, he goes to King of Prussia, where he sets up a legal business.
Right.
And his brother, meantime, is, I believe, a very distinguished physician. I forget exactly what his field was, but I believe the name, is the name that was widely recognized.
How would you describe his character?
Well, I thought he was just an ideal guy. I mean, he had a good sense of humor, and he was tough as nails, and as I say, I don't think he was Jewish, but I think he was very anti-Nazi on strictly humanitarian grounds,
Yeah.
which is not difficult to be.
Was his, I suppose his English must have been very good by then.
He had an accent, but he was, but on the other hand, he really understood Germany, and you remember one of the features of the trial, which is not much mentioned, is the fact that we did try these organizations.
Yeah.
And I think Kellerman was involved in the organizations, and Kempner may well have been. And I really don't know what Harriet did for him. As I say, even my husband and wives didn't spend their time gossiping about their work. But I knew that she had hate. For example, some woman wrote in and said she knew how to get in touch with Martin Bormann. So they rushed off to find her.
Kempner did this, and your wife? And your wife?
He took Harriet along,
Yeah.
although Harriet did not speak German.
Yeah.
Anyway, this woman turned out had some sort of she was a nut. She had, I don't know, a walnut on a string, and she that type of thing that they were running down. On the other hand, there was one wonderful scene there that I've never forgotten. I think it was when Gustavius was testifying. They said, well, how much money do you get from Army Intelligence, U.S. Army Intelligence? He said, nothing, I got no. Oh, come on, they couldn't. Obviously, in the pay of the United States, no. Anyway. Well, they said to the court they would like to have a subpoena for General Donovan to come.
There has to be some funding there
Subpoena
for them
for,
to actually be able to do these.
uh,
Now, ultimately, I
Secretary
wanna work out
Stimson of the Army to come. And that was consternation all over the courtroom because, oh dear. And the U.S., I regret to say, and I think Mrs. Dobbie was in the room at the time, well, it didn't occur to us what the answer to that was. And I think it was Maxwell Fox who got up and said, Your Honor, said he, the Lord Justice Lawrence, it is inappropriate to bring in witnesses to challenge the testimony of a witness. If he's lying, that can later be brought up at a perjury trial.
Yeah.
But if we start having witnesses brought in and other witnesses, this trial could go on forever. I mean, this is a collateral issue that has nothing to do with what we're discussing here. And it's a well-known principle of law that you don't bring in witnesses. And Lauren said, yes, that's very true. Now, of course, there's the exception if you bring in a question of, has he been convicted of a crime, and he denies it, you are allowed to bring in a witness to establish the fact that he has been, yes, your Lord, you're quite right on. Well, anyway, they were buzzing along happily on this basis. Now, two things were noticeable about this. One is, apparently under German law, you are allowed to bring witnesses. So all this was news to the Germans that you couldn't do it. And at least that was the impression I had from what they were screaming about. And second, they were purring at each other. I mean, Lawrence said, yeah, that's right on there, except. The British were all, I had the impression that they were all a very competent group of characters.
Where had you and Harriet met?
She went to Yale Law School. She was went to Wisconsin Law School as editor-in-chief of the Law Review. Got fellowship to Yale as Sterling Fellow. And when she graduated from Yale, she came to Washington to get a job and work for me. I was then on the board of economic warfare.
Right.
She made quite an impression on me. We then decided to get married, but I got drafted. Well, first I went to Brazil, and then I came back. Was drafted, and then they sent me to London, whereupon she got herself assigned by the State Department to the embassy in London, where she worked on the blockade committee. And that was where we got married, because we recognized that if we got married before, Mrs. Shipley would see that we never got together again.
Yeah, shrewd move.
So having gotten married in Europe, the whole thing was, we had a wholly different thing. Then she worked under her maiden name, and that's why they recruited her for Nuremberg without
Well, this is just
realizing.
coincidental. Isn't that extraordinary?
Yeah, they
You're so.
I had been assigned to
Yeah.
Nuremberg.
She's recruited and you're recruited separately.
Quite separate.
Nobody knows you're married.
No.
Who's doing all of this?
Yeah.
Yeah. That must have been a joyous moment when you discover that.
Oh, boy. Well, I think she may have finagled it in London, because she knew I was working in Nuremberg.
That sounds more.
So she may have, put-
More like real life.
But I don't think they knew that she was arranging to join her husband. And it was really God then arranged to keep us there. I mean,
Yeah. So you two are down there, presumably to the world. Technically you're unmarried, but everybody knows. Is it
That's
like?
right. Lieutenant Margolies and Harriet Zetterberg were sharing a room at the Grenander
must have seemed
Hotel.
very
What else
modern.
was new? I mean,
Yeah.
we were invited to different parties.
Yeah. Well, were there people who thought that you were just two people living together?
Only a very small group know that we were married.
You must have seemed very advanced and daring for that period.
No, not at Nuremberg. Of course, remember, I went off and got witnesses. That was one of my activities,
Yeah.
which kept me pretty busy. And then God sent me on a tour of Belgium, France, and England to discuss how they conducted war crime trials on their own without.
Yeah. Who did you get witnesses against? Do you recall any?
Oh, yes, those are my two great achievements. You see, first of all, we were supposed to have witnesses.
Right, we discussed that.
Waste of time.
Yeah.
The general notion was that in a trial run by the victors against the vanquished, the witnesses would all be framed or something like that. Anyway, the story had a bee in his bonnet about no witnesses. So we had no witnesses for the concentration camp thing, which the Tusses are really quite nasty about in their book about God's presentation. They say he overkilled, put everybody to sleep. Just one horrible thing after another, not at all selective. I mean, criticism like that I can live with.
Understandably.
But I then got this witness, Dr. Blaha, about a month after we finished our presentation on the concentration camp. We got word about him. I'd seen his affidavit. It was absolutely fantastic. He had been a doctor at Dachau, and he had performed autopsies, and he had performed autopsy after thousands of autopsies. I found this really quite an interesting gentleman, because he knew why people had been killed and how they'd been murdered and what had happened to them, and those had been worked on medical examination. I mean, it's really a great source of information from a pretty reliable background. He'd gone home. So I Harriet and I went to Czechoslovakia and brought him back to Nuremberg. And I worked out an affidavit of what he had to say, which was put in the record rather than having him testify for some reason or other. And then he was examined on the basis of that statement. So my name does appear in the transcript as having gotten this affidavit. It's on the affidavit, which I was with. But the Tusas go absolutely bananas. They were so delighted with this witness, and he really is. Of course, part of it is that Tusa himself is a Czech, who's now head of the BBC or something.
Oh, is he?
He's a big wheel in the BBC.
Yeah.
And his wife is American, English. But either because this guy is Czech or because they're really impressed by it, they're very flattering about his testimony. And it was true that it's much more interesting than reading affidavits. But he identified the defendants of having visited Dachau, for example.
Can you remember which ones? I mean, I'll get that testimony.
Well,
but
Rosenberg and Frick, who had been the Governor General of Czechoslovakia.
Kaltenbrunner.
No. I know it's listed in Tusa's book is pretty good, by the way. They spent a lot of time on Blaha because, as I say, they're Czech and they think he's wonderful.
You find this guy. Let's begin with the blackboard.
Well, first we realize that these people are questioned when they are released from the camps. Many of them were interrogated, and I don't know who does that. Army intelligence.
Right.
And they shipped that stuff up to us.
Right.
And his had been sufficiently interesting, so they drew our attention to it.
So this comes across your desk.
Yeah.
So you're, one day, among the other duties you're performing, you're going through interrogatories that the Army intelligence has done, let's say, and here's one by a Dr. Blaha.
Yeah.
Catches your fancy. Take it from there.
Well, I go to see Dalton. I say, this guy is really, this is what we really needed for the concentration camp case. And you want to tell Jackson that this is, no witnesses, but this guy's an exception. And he did, and Jackson agreed. Then the problem was to find them.
All right, that's the part I want to hear about.
Well, they gave me a driver and a car, and Harriet and I set off to Czechoslovakia. And this was during Christmas recess, which is part of the reason that we did it. And so I went to the embassy and...
Let me just interrupt just for a moment, so I get a good, clear picture of this. What inkling do you have as to what direction to set off? Do you have an old address from his testimony?
No, not at all. That's why I went to the embassy in Prague and said, how does one track down a guy who had been in a concentration camp in Dachau? And they said there's an organization of former concentration camp victims.
Right.
And why don't you go and talk to them?
Yes.
So I went to see them and said I was looking for Blaha, and sure enough they had his register and his address. And he was in, oh dear, I remember, it's the capital of Slovakia. There's Czechoslovakia, Czechs and the Slovaks.
Right.
The capital of Slovakia is where he was living at the town that begins with I. At any rate, I think I called him up, or I sent him a telegram saying that he'd be interested, and sent one back saying he would be happy to return and testify, but he had just gotten home after the war and he wanted to be with his family over the holidays.
Yes.
So, we were left in Prague to spend the holidays.
Yes.
Meantime, the other people at Nuremberg had gone off to the mountains in Bavaria,
Right.
for skiing and stuff, where Jim Rowe broke his leg, I believe. But I was in Czechoslovakia, and I met this guy named Ivan. And anyway, he and I became quite friendly, and then I arranged for him to get a job in Nuremberg, the trial. And he was the expert on slave labor. He had been in 3 concentration camps.
So he got Salko hung.
Yeah,
In a sense.
And
Sure.
also for subsequent proceedings, he stayed on and worked there.
Yeah. But anyway, your Dr. Blaha, you let him have Christmas off.
Yeah,
And then what do you
I
do?
drove to that town. I remember the bed bugs in the hotel.
To his town.
his town. They picked him up and brought him back to Nuremberg.
Well, upon seeing you, is this guy at all, I would be concerned if I were him that I might wind up in the dock instead of just the witness box. Did you have any necessity to reassure him?
Well, no. No, he couldn't wait to get on the stand and
Yeah.
tell his
So
story.
he hasn't liquidated people, he just did autopsies.
Oh, yeah.
Because I saw the testimony, I just,
And to do medical experiments on healthy people, and he refused to. That's why they shifted him to the autopsy room.
yeah.
Why they kept autopsies, I don't remember.
So they bring him down, so you put him in the car.
And established him in Nuremberg, and first I worked up his testimony on an
Yeah.
affidavit,
Yeah.
and then he took the stand, and he was very effective under cross-examination.
So his evidence is evidence against which defendants?
Well, at least a half a dozen, I don't remember.
Yeah. Any of those who had a connection, the charges relating to the camps, I would guess.
Well, the mere fact that they were identified as having visited a camp
Yeah.
was enough for the court.
Yeah.
Any connection. The other witness I got, for example, was against Funk.
Yeah.
There's a man named Poole.
Oh, I want to hear about that. I'm vaguely familiar.
Oh,
Is this the one where the issue is, does Funk know how this particular gold
Yeah.
gets, oh, I want to hear about that.
Well, I heard, see, Funk's general attitude was that he was a nothing sort of character, that Schock had all the bright ideas, and everything had been put in order by Schock. And when he took over from Schock, he did nothing except carry out whatever ideas Schock had. He didn't contribute a thing to the
Yeah.
war effort one way or the other. And of course, Schock was acquitted, so he didn't know Schock was going to be acquitted, but he rather suspected that. And the point was, if you're going to acquit Schock, you got to acquit me. So this testimony, turned out there were other things we had on him too, but this testimony, there again, we got an affidavit from a man named Pohl who had been in the Bundesbank with Funk. And you see, they found the gold teeth in the vaults. And they had photographs, so they had moving pictures of the vaults, which we showed in court, by the way. The gold teeth being hauled out of the vaults. And the eyeglasses, gold eyeglasses. And Paul said, well, this is a deal that Funk worked out with the Gestapo. So I went to find Powell, who had been a director of the Bundesbank under Funk, and he was a prisoner in the French zone up near Strasbourg, somewhere in that area. And he made an affidavit which we worked out at that camp, and then we brought it back and confronted. Dodd used it to confront Funk on the stand when he had taken it.
Yeah.
And Funk denied it. But nevertheless, it was later a man named Poole turned up. I think he was brought as a witness, a defense witness of all things, by Frick or somebody. And Poole said that he was the Gestapo agent who had worked up the deal with Funk, so that,
Yeah.
I mean, that he
Yeah.
really nailed it.